quite a whirlwind to be moving to another country. Have you ever lived in another country before?
It was strange. Like, I guess yes and no, just because there were a few years where it was really hectic and on the road and stuff. So it felt like I didn't live in any country, but a load at the same time. So no, I've never had like a home out, like a base outside of the UK, really.
That's wild, man. Is it exciting? Is it scary? How are you feeling about it?
Honestly, I've only been here since the 20th, so it's still kind of settling in. And the fact that I've got the exact same desk set up the exact same way is definitely strange and feels like I haven't gone anywhere yet.
Yeah. Was that kind of the primary reason to move from the UK to the Netherlands, just because you do more business there, basically? Like there's more demand for what you're doing?
Without getting super political, there's not a lot of reason to stay in the UK right now.
Yeah, no, I feel that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of, the last few years in America have been a little rocky as well. Yeah, I think there's some similarities there.
Yeah, there are. It's got really like, there's a lot going wrong with the UK at the moment, and it doesn't seem like there's much of an end in sight for now.
Yeah.
And being out here renting for a while, my girlfriend's Dutch, and I get good shows out here. Like it's going to be great to be able to just go to European shows on a train.
Man,
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Like,
that's true. What a dream. And I mean, it's interesting too from the music side on the UK, because I've talked to other people. I had Flux Pavilion on this show a while back, and I've referenced this a couple times, but that was something he complained about a lot, was that, he was like, I can't play a show in the UK anymore. Like me, Flux Pavilion, it's crazy. And I've heard other people kind of say that as well, that, especially for the UK, it's like, I don't know. I'd like your opinion, because from an outside perspective, like I try to think about why that would be. And to me, it's like the UK is always setting the tempo as far as like what's cool in dance music and like what's going to be next all around the world, But then I wonder if it moves so fast that people are kind of just over it so quickly that, even a culture that makes a Fox Stevenson is like moving too fast for it. You know what I mean?
I mean, we could get into that for sure. The UK is really weird, man. The UK is super weird. I think there's a lot of, I think because people my age and younger and older as well grew up with dance music in a way that most American kids didn't. There's a real bedrock of reference that DJs out there can draw from, and also because of the fact that there's almost a desensitization to the sounds. I feel like it's institutional, and it's there's just a lot more that's established, and so that you get these really crazy tangents, especially at the moment in drum and bass. There's a lot of interesting sounds that are just really over the top in a very different way to how dubstep has kind of gone off in its own over the top way.
Right.
And I don't know. It's so much to unpack. It's just a total institution.
Right.
And I'm going to have to think of how I would word any of that for it, because obviously I also wouldn't want to seem like I was talking down on people. But basically, the drum and bass scene just seems to be really fad heavy and have gone to. I mean, if you watch, and this is no shade against him, but if you watch like a Headaches set, there's this really interesting it's so gratuitous, and that's because people are ready for it, and they've heard drum and bass for so long, and like drum and bass is maybe even just crowning in the USA now, if at all.
Right. That's a whole nother thing too.
Exactly. But we've had the sound since the 90s, so that sound's got to get really, really pushed for the underground and like the things that feels cutting edge and stuff. Like that's never been my exact shtick. I'm more of a fusion guy. Like I'm like, what if we put these things together? But,
right. Well, that's another thing, right? Is that what you do is even harder to categorize. It's not like you could take what you do and nail it to an exact era or trend or sound, that kind of thing, because I think you've always you've sort of thrived by existing in that in between space a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Thank you. I take that as a compliment, honestly, man. It's definitely where I aim to be, but purely from sheer self-service or arrogance, honestly, is I just want to make the thing that would interest me, and therefore I'm immune to a trend. It's like, oh, this is what's happening over there. Oh, this is what's really cool about this sound. Don't like the rest of it. I'll take this bit. Thanks.
So talking about like your stylistic choices, and you were saying it's like almost a selfish thing for you to just to do that. I mean, that's interesting because listening to your back catalog, and I was listening to a lot of your music before we came to talk today. I mean, it seems like it's something you've always done, like kind of since the start of it. At the start of it, like, the start of the Fox Stevenson project. Like, we'll talk about, how you got into music and all that a little later, but just, the project itself, starting it off, was it that same intention of just like, I think this part of this sound is cool and this part of this sound is cool, and I'm going to combine them because that seems fun? Or was there like a higher like vision for it? If you think back to like the start of the project, what were you thinking about?
So coming into the Fox Stevenson project, I just finished an EP under the name Stan SB, and that had done really well. And as part of that, there was a real imprinting that the drum and bass scene had done onto me, as like Netsky had just happened and a few other things had happened. And there was people who felt a sort of expectation of what I should become. And for me, I always reel at those things, maybe a little too much. I really hate expectations on musicians. And for me, the only thing that can be constant is your own taste. Yeah. So I just hold on to that and nothing else and try and bat away, or even deliberately, maybe to my own detriment, go the other way to those things. Yeah. But going into Fox Stevenson, what was really funny and interesting is it was a name change. And the first few things I brought out were very intentionally not drum and bass. So people wouldn't expect only that from what I do. And it was strange because it gave people a chance to like reevaluate whether they wanted to stick around, because I'd actually like released some of those as IDs and they'd been like quite like, there'd been interest. And then I released them under a different name. They were like, you changed, man. It's like same IDs.
That's hilarious though, because that's so telling of how we consume art in general, Is like the same thing. I saw somebody talking about Skrillex recently, because Skrillex has been back dropping a bunch of songs, and I think they're all phenomenal. I couldn't be a bigger fan of Skrillex, as I think many people are. But this was just some weirdo talking on Twitter about how like, oh, well, these songs, like if somebody who wasn't named Skrillex put them out, they wouldn't get the same kind of react. It's that kind of thing. It's like, that's true, but that's just because Skrillex is a famous person and, we pay more attention. But it is funny to think about just all the things we need to arrange in our head first before we decide if we like something or not, Yeah. It's a weird thing, and all the baggage we take with us about the scene and the artist and all. It's bizarre.
Yeah, and even a group of listeners that you've seen once at a show who were really into an artist would influence that. Like if you see a load of people that are not your kind of people, like without getting into like cliquiness, that may tarnish an artist for you forever. And then 5 years later, you hear a song by them, and it's like, oh, this is amazing. And then you find them and it's like, I was so shallow. I was so shallow to not like this artist because I didn't like how this group of people were dressed at his show. But that really does happen. It's
absolutely
crazy.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reaction to you was that sort of the more insular drum and bass scene, like seeing a new thing that they sort of saw as like an outside thing and just being like, wow, this isn't part of what we do. You know what I mean?
To a degree, but that was, so going back to the original question, that was the point. It was like, I just wanted to release music. And for me, the mission statement at the heart of it is that we still don't have genuine songwriters and club agnostic writers. I mean, we do now, but even most of us still will either completely shun the idea of a drop, or in lieu of a chorus or something poppier than you could really call a drop, or we're just writing pop songs that lead to drops. And I think that there is a middle ground that doesn't quite exist in a true form yet. Like I think there are songs that do, but for me, that's as Fox Stevenson, that's always where I wanted to get to. And it's hard, and especially if you do track my career, there are points where you can see that I was pulled into a sub scene, and I was like having to make tracks so that I could tour with a dubstep artist, having to et cetera. But especially now where I'm at with my listener base being pretty happy to listen to whatever I throw at them. Luckily, honestly, so luckily, that's where I want to go. And it's where I've always wanted to go, to a place where we find post-EDM. We find what it means to be a singer-songwriter in a post-EDM world. And I think that as soon as we get that generation of artists, like, we could end up in a place where sound design is used as an emotional songwriting tool, not just as a tool to flex what you can do in your DAW.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love that, because that's when we get to that point, that kind of singularity, if you will, like, that's such a great goal, because I think that goes back to the original roots of dance music, which is like inclusivity and like bringing people in. Whereas I think the flip side of, just like sound design as, jacking off and impressing other nerds or whatever, there's nothing wrong with it, but it just all kind of funnels into one singular point after a while. Like, it doesn't bring in anyone new, and it keeps a lot of people out, I think. Whereas I think what you're talking about is just flipping it and instead like trying to bring in as many people as possible. I mean, let's take it back for a minute, man, and then we can come back, because I want to, obviously we got to talk a little bit about like the new record and all of that too. But, before this, before Fox Stevenson, before the project, before Fox Stevenson, like, how did music come into your life when you were a kid? Like, you grew up in Leeds, is that right?
Kinda. I grew up in London up until the age of like 6 or 7.
Okay.
And then York for like another 6 or 7 years, and then Leeds when I was around 13, 14. Music was always there. My dad was in bands before I was born. He was actually in a band with another woman before that band broke up and he met my mum. But that band for him, like he's quite old. I hate to say was, because inside he's still a very serious musician, but he was quite a serious musician through the 70s and 80s, I believe. Late 70s and 80s. Like guitarist, singer, songwriter with a like a 7-piece big, like I don't know exactly what kind of music they made. It was really huge sounding, almost like polyphonic spree sounding kind of stuff.
Right.
But that he'd hate for me to say that. Yeah. They had like they were on the cusp, I believe. They had like I think a deal with Virgin at the time or some shit like that, and then broke up the night before some big talk show or something like that.
Wow.
As the lore goes, I don't know exactly what the ins and outs were.
Yeah.
But that's So there were instruments. There was a piano, which obviously is a incredible head start. Just to have a piano in the house you live in, and to not be discouraged from being on it, and to actually be like not aggressively but like encouraged, like, hey man, try this out. Like, my dad would play guitar and I would find things, and sometimes I would play shit and sometimes I would find other things, and then come to it on my own. It was always a little bit there. But in York, before I was like 13, 14, I did a little bit of production, but I was much more into dancing and theater and like acting and stuff, and then moved to Leeds. Long story short, I made a lot of personal decisions about the way I carry myself and think about other people, and just kind of not ostracized myself, but decided that, but realized maybe at quite an early age, I didn't have to be or do anything for anyone else. And so if there weren't people who were interested in hanging out, then I could do something I enjoyed and find peace and happiness within that. And that was continuing music production, because that had been kind of there a little bit from GarageBand and stuff. And
well, that's
Logic.
really interesting, just to stop you for a second, to think about, because I think at that age, there's such a pressure to fit in and to find your crowd. And, that's the age when kids get bullied or do bullying to other kids, that kind of thing. Like, so it's interesting to hear you talk about just sort of removing yourself from that sort of social equation. Like what? Yeah. Because I think most kids don't even realize it's an option to remove yourself from that.
Yeah.
like what was different for you? Do you think it was just sort of your parents' background and that they were like pretty open and encouraging? Or was it something about the school you were in or the people around you? Do you know what that was?
It was a mixture of two things. It was a mixture of having a bit of a temper at the age of like 12 and 13. I was one of those kids, and I wasn't like hyper violent with this or anything, but those kids you wind up to eventually they'll pop and they'll like scream or do something crazy or whatever. Like I had friends. I wasn't like a loner or terminally bullied or anything like that. People have had it much worse than I had it at that time. But I was still like the kind of the balloon that they would fill up as a person. And it used to upset me so much. It was like, you're my friends. Why would you do this to me? I don't understand. And for them, it was just funny. But I don't think there was much malice in it. But I just hated how that made me feel. And when I moved at the age of 13 from York to Leeds, I had a reset button. I didn't want anybody to have that control or power over me ever again. Like these friends that I trusted would have been that way to me, and that hurt. And so I was like, wait, like I answer to myself. Like I'm the constant in my own life, just as you are for yours and anybody is for theirs. You're your only true fucking constant. And that's not to say you should cut everyone else out of your life or keep a barrier up, but you can decide everything about that one thing. And I'd been producing for a little while, and I knew I loved it. I knew I was really enjoying it. And so I just was like, well, I had friends after I moved, like to a degree, but I wasn't there a lot. I would go home after school and I would open up GarageBand and then eventually Logic and Reason for a little while. And I was just super lucky that I had found it, that I had any interest in it at all, because I'm terrible at giving people advice about their early career, because I was just before the wave. I was already doing it when Skrillex happened.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, man. I mean, I was sort of a similar thing to your last point, in the sense that, I was DJing for a long time before it was really a popular thing in the States. And it's interesting to see it change. I'm sure it's interesting to you too, to like see all of a sudden your little like private passion is now sort of a much more mainstreamed thing. And all of a sudden, like being a DJ and a producer is cool. And there's like famous DJ producer celebrities, which never was the case, at least for me, when I started, really, at least not in the way it is now. I don't know. How did you take that when EDM really started becoming a thing, and all of a sudden this little scene that we were a part of was almost engulfed by this much bigger, hungrier audience? You know what I mean?
I've never thought about it in these terms, but it happened a couple times in a slightly similar way. And maybe this sounds really aggrandizing, but there'd been quite a few things in my life that I found myself getting into a couple of years before they blew. Like Blink, I was quite into Blink 182 before they blew up, and things like that. And so it was just like, happened again.
But it doesn't. I mean, maybe you're just having a good reaction to that, because I think a lot of times people who are sort of a little ahead of the curve, for whatever reason, there can be some resentment once everybody else catches up. And, all of a sudden it's like, well, sometimes it's like they don't necessarily care that you were already there. You know what I mean?
I think it's really easy to have that position, and that's something I think a lot of people confront in life, like this kind of coveting the thing you love as something of depreciating value when other people get involved, which is horse shit. But
I agree with you, for the record. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's quite hard not to do that, especially when you're like, you know, in your late teens or even earlier teens. I really liked that. It honestly, when all that happened, it felt like a gold rush. It felt like, oh, I could be part of this. I've been doing this for a while, and anybody who's going to be jumping on now, I've got years on, and that's really all it felt like. It's such an interesting thing. I think the thing that comes with that's the worst is the money. And I'm either going to sound like a cliche or an absolute like grassroots electronic music hippie, but it does hurt any kind of musical scene the moment that it becomes really cool and lucrative to be part of it, because you start getting the optimization of the things that are catching the new ears.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that people can't do that, because obviously they can and they do. But what ends up happening is you end up with this game that gets played within the music that's neither between the people who have always loved it or always made it. It's between the people who've showed up to impress the new people who have showed up. And you end up with something completely different. And sometimes it completely eclipses what was there originally. Sometimes they connect really well. House music was quite good for that, I would say. House music kept a lot of its own identity through a lot of the years. Dubstep less so.
Yeah.
And I guess that's just down to industry. It's just down to when suddenly there's people who don't even care about the thing and they're just there to make the money. It stops being about what it was about and starts being about the product. And once you're turning art into a product, you stop having the reason anybody's there in the first place. And then often, as is always the case with dance music, it becomes about other things like the drugs or the sex or the like rock and roll was. You know, like they'll look back on EDM right now and say it was like rock and roll was. And it makes me wonder how much about all of the nostalgia we were fed by our parents or grandparents about those days, and whether they really were as musical and amazing as they were, or if hindsight really is just a bitch.
It's so funny to think about, because I mean, if you go back, I will say, if you go back and listen to some of the 80s hair metal groups that get like the most hate of just being like, this was so stupid and shallow and all that, some of those bands were great musicians and they wrote some great songs. Like some of that stuff I think holds up if you're able to sort of take it out of its context, you know, which I feel like some EDM stuff will be like that, where you can be like, yeah, like this, you know, I'm not going to name names, but like whatever X big room house artist in the height of the EDM boom, like, yeah, they were this whole deal was kind of corny. But then, you know, yeah, a couple of these songs are interesting or like forward thinking if we're able to sort of recontextualize it now. Because I think we did have like the EDM hair metal era, you know what I mean?
I think we're in it. Not to put any shade on anyone. There's a couple, but like, I go back and forth on this because I feel like nowadays, because there's so many sounds that have become so established that they've become really heavily like formalized. I wonder if we're actually back to it being actually dance music, because you know, I'm sure that us being of a similar age, there was that perception that dance music was all the same because it was supposed to be like, you know, into each other. It was supposed to hold the vibe again,
right? Like
hold the vibe the whole night. We're there again. It's really interesting because it doesn't feel as cool as that old stuff felt for that.
Yeah, but maybe that's just, maybe we're older and we know too much now. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I think to kids, like younger kids just getting into dance music now, I don't think I agree with you, but I don't think they necessarily see it that way. You know what I mean? Because to them, they haven't seen all the stuff that already happened or the context for what's happening now. So for them, it's all just kind of new and exciting. Like everyone just sort of starts from their own, their own line and goes forward from there, which is an interesting thing because it's like, yeah, we get, you stick around long enough and you can kind of analyze these trends and see these patterns. But by the time you're old enough and wise enough to see it happening, you're kind of not the target market anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like jazz.
Yeah.
it's the weirdest thing because, like, taking dubstep, it's become a form. It's become like, these are the things that you do as a dubstep musician. These are the things that you reference. Like, there are tracks that, like, what was it? Was it Jotaro that had the first like really huge fake out drop?
I think so. Yeah.
Like, it's like jazz. People are referencing things in exactly the same way. It's just computer jazz instead.
Well, so maybe this is actually an interesting way to talk about your new record, which is Enemy Brain Entertainment Suite. For anybody who hasn't heard it yet, go out and listen to it. I really like it. But
thank you.
It is, I would say, mostly not dubstep. Was that like a conscious reaction to some of the stuff we're talking about? Or was that, or was the songwriting for you kind of just what felt good in the moment?
Yeah, just self-serving. I mean, I there's so much incredible production in dubstep and stuff, but yeah, it's just not for me anymore. Like the stuff that's going on right there. Like, I'll hit that tempo again, but it won't sound like dubstep, I guess. But the record was just me doing stuff. I honestly, let me double check which tracks are on here again. It was a lot of
I love that you have to check.
Oh, I have so many things on my hard drive.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. That's a hilarious thing to be like, oh yeah, what songs are on my album again?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm always just upping the bet. I'm just trying to find like what I was talking about earlier, that coming towards a place of equilibrium between all of the things that I want to say and be and do musically. And sit on all of the fences at the same time, perfectly balanced. It's just me still trying to. I'm just putting down like flags saying it's not here. It's like north of this. It's like and that it's just me continuing that process of trying to find those things. I thought I had it with Enemy Brain, but there were some things I feel I got. I mean, you always think you have to be able to take your losses and wins with each track. But yeah, just songwriting. I've been through a lot of changes in the last year for like life. We all have had to like reevaluate what life looks like post pandemic, and that's a cliche, but it's also hugely true. No one's life is the same as it was before the pandemic.
As specific or not as you want to be, like what kinds of things for you? Is it just like how you approach touring and that kind of thing, or is it more of a like other life changes mentality?
So I had a lot of personal life changes. Like I fell out of some relationships and things, fell into others, realizing that I had my album, my like debut album, Killjoy, and I would still call this record an EP, even though it's a big one.
Sure.
I didn't have album brain for this. Having, post Killjoy and having Dreamland become my biggest single, I was like, oh, okay. So I don't need to do a couple of these things that I do enjoy doing to make people happy and stick around. Like, as a blueprint for me, like Dreamland was a really reassuring thing to have go bigger than a few of my other tracks, because it doesn't have a drop. It's just choruses. And I find that so exciting and freeing as a musician. And I still get booked for a drum and bass show where I have to play tracks with drops, and it's like, oh shit, how do I do this? But I'm still trying to find what I am in a certain sense. Like, I know all the things I want to be. It's how do those things equate to each other?
Well, because that was around the time when you were starting to do the live band incarnation, right? And I would imagine, my guess is that was going to be sort of a bigger thing, and then the pandemic happens, and you sort of have to figure out now, like, restart that whole process of like, okay, we had it all set up, and now what are we going to do with it? But do you see yourself heading more towards that direction of like a full live act with a band, like more so than a DJ? eventually down the line?
Yeah, I would love to get to a place where you would have to specify that it's a DJ set for me, for people to expect me to DJ, because they expect an artist or a musician, because I never chose to be a DJ. Like, I enjoy it and I have fun doing it, and there are times where I feel like I'm okay at it.
So when you started getting bookings originally, did you were getting booked for your productions, I'd imagine. Did you have to figure out how to DJ in order to satisfy the demand for what you were doing?
Exactly so. Yeah, I was showing up, like, I didn't know how to use decks, and I didn't have a wallet of CDs, and I didn't have that. So I actually was showing up with a MIDI keyboard and a laptop, and like plugging phono leads into one channel on the decks and pissing off legendary DJs. like, hey man, I'm sorry. I know you got 2 more tracks left. I just got to unplug this and like lean over.
You're like 8 chords all over them. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Most popular guy in the booth. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was hated for that. But also at the same time, I was hated for doing my own vocals and stuff in a genre that was so traditional as well. It was what it was. But I guess that just cemented me feeling like I'm still getting bookings despite all this outsider status. Maybe I just don't need to I don't need to conform to what's going on. There's enough people doing that, and I got something going on. I didn't want to be a DJ. I'd love to get to a place where I'm viewed in the same way that someone like no, I can't think of that many anymore. There used to be so many more acts that produced themselves and sang on it, but I feel like that the publishing world's kind of taken over and everyone's got a producer now.
I mean, I feel like somebody who's doing it on a pretty big level right now is a guy like MIDI.
Oh yeah.
It's a different sound, but I think he kind of has that similar background of, he started off just doing kind of more down the middle EDM dance music kind of stuff. And then over time morphed into this like crazy pop dance hybrid thing but he's still, it's all coming from him,
Do you feel like, cause I guess the Porter, Madian kind of like that sphere of things is not a sphere I follow a huge amount, mostly because I don't want to accidentally start sounding like them, because I feel like I enjoy the music when I hear it, but I also wouldn't want to like try and seem like I was biting off anything in that area too much. I feel like those guys are still kind of viewed as producer boys, if that's fair. And I'm trying to be more like the singer who also produces all their beats. Kind of like, right. I mean, it's not a good person to reference these days, but like when everyone was like, yeah, Kanye makes his own beats, like. Sure.
Yeah. Well, but it's interesting because I think, like, take any of those names, Kanye, Porter, Maddie, and anyone. I think if you talk to them, it would kind of all be the same thing of them.
Oh, entirely. I just mean perception.
Yeah. And I don't think you're wrong, but yeah, I think they're all kind of in that zone of trying to change that perception as much as they can. Porter especially, I feel like is, yeah. Like you could tell he still loves DJing and weird underground electronic music, but for his main thing, like, yeah, it's going further and further away. Like he's just trying to be a pop singer, which I mean that in a good way. Like he's, It's incredible what he's doing, but yeah, it's interesting, man, because I do feel like, yeah, there's not a ton of people in that mold, or at least in that mindset at the moment. It's just a few. And maybe that's just because it's a harder road to go down in a sense, because there's just you're blazing your own trail. You know what I mean? Like it's, I think, much easier to just be like, there's this DJ scene and people play these, X 30, 40 clubs around the country playing this kind of music. And if I just fit in with this scene, like I can just kind of slot into this machine, Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that to like shit on anybody. That's more or less what I do. Like I still DJ and play the clubs and all that, and I love it, but it is an established route. Whereas I'm sure you've run into that too, of just like, showing up at a festival and being like, what, who am I playing with? Like, why did you want me here? that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's a never-ending battle for anybody like Porter and myself and Maddie and that lot. It doesn't exist yet, and someone's going to be the straw to break the camel's back. And it's really interesting because there are artists that maybe wouldn't be counted as dance artists who are kind of doing slightly similar things as well, in and around like, you know, rock and hip hop and things, just trying to find this place where like there's this weird in between landscape genre that just hasn't had its Skrillex yet, and it will.
Sorry, not to interrupt you. You know what I just thought of? I don't know if you would agree, but what about a group like the Postal Service? I feel like Postal Service is kind of one of those, not that they get associated with dance music at all, but it is kind of like nerdy producery beats, like backing it with that sort of indie singer-songwriter thing. And they're so huge. I feel like, I don't know, this is maybe just off the top of my head, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel like they're almost one of the most successful examples of this thing we're talking about that I can think
Owl
of.
City.
Yeah, Owl City, that's true.
Yeah, no, I was actually really sad when Owl City got really huge because all the music I was making at the time had a similar sort of music thing to it. But also I was like, damn, Postal Service just got done dirty. But
oh yeah, true.
But no hate on Owl City, of course. Postal Service were amazing. They totally got it. Like, it's interesting, isn't it? There is not the space for that act yet because it's not something that people understand. And actually, I think it's MIDI. I think MIDI is the problem. I always hesitate to say this publicly because I think this is a bit of a smoking gun. But I've seen some acts live that are amazing musicians. They make cool tracks that go off in clubs and they have songs, etc., like big songs, and they're dancey. But people, it's really easy to get bogged down in this ancillary world where you and I know what like an octopad's doing. We know like we see someone doing it on the drum pads, and it's like, yeah, that we can connect the things. But that's not a common thread for the audience. That's not something that somebody who isn't a music appraiser, they're not somebody who watches all the music videos or any of the DAW sweatbox hours the 14-year-old normal. The normal 14-year-old's not just going to look at your keyboard and be like, that's exactly what that sound is. They hear the total sound. We have established visual things. Drums. We know what drums sound like and look like. We know what guitars sound like and look like. We know what singers sound like and look like. Pianos are probably the next thing, but after that, you're into some weird territory where people just don't really know what instruments do or are. And we've all got friends who are very unmusical and, they don't know exactly what X or Y instrument even sounds or looks like. You need to be able to instantly communicate your message live so that people can look at it, because we're visual creatures. And if anything, social media has completely proven that in the last 10 years. If you see something, it's real, or it's at least palpable. We as electronic musicians, we have to find our way for that to make sense. I mean, it's why Excision blew it, not why Excision blew the fuck up, but it's instrumental in why Excision's live shows are so big, because he won the visuals game. He won. He won the arms race.
Yeah. I mean, it's him and Eric Prydz, really. I don't know who else is on that level. Chemical Brothers, I guess, but they're in another universe.
Yeah, predating it as well. But he went there and he turned dubstep into something visual.
Yeah.
And when it comes to us artist musician people, it's like, how do we translate that? My personal shtick is that I just dance music means visuals, and then the live band is drums, guitar, and my vocals, because those are the three things that people understand. Like, they can look at it and hear it.
Yeah.
And then what else do you need? Like, if you've got a singer who is also the singer from the record and the person who is there, and it's the person who you've been listening to and following. That's human. That's human as fuck.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah.
And it's still a live show, and you don't. Yeah. I don't know. I kind of lost my train of thought.
No, but yeah. I mean, I think a couple things in what you just said stood out to me. One is that I think when DJing became more of a rock star thing, and when the stages got bigger and you were further away from the audience and above the audience, but still you're just like a person in front of a couple decks, it is a weird dichotomy, because if you're a person on a couple decks just DJing and that's it, that doesn't really deserve to be on a giant stage far away from people. You know, it's like DJing's meant to be like, you're right with the people, you're on the dance floor, everybody's, you know, not even looking at you, that kind of thing. Like, that's the roots of DJing. And so you're right. I think the excision thing, you have to solve that problem. It's like, okay, if the stage gets this big, we have to fill this stage. Like, there's got to be something going on to justify our own existence on this stage. And you're completely right. I think he solved it sort of perfectly. I don't think you could do it better than that. And then, there was a second thing I was going to say, which has now maybe left my brain entirely. Yeah, I think it's gone, which is fine. But
I was talking about the instruments. Maybe was
the instruments, the human element to a certain extent. I think one way or another, you said this, and this is obviously true, is like, you have to bring the human element to it, no matter how big or how small the stage is. I think if the human element isn't there, you're just not gonna, even with something like Excision, where, you know, that's not necessarily like an intimate experience, but it's, you know, I think it's such an immersive kind of experience that, at least for the people who are there, you know, it's like this assault on the senses that I think you do just sort of instinctively react to. Like, even though it's not Excision bearing his soul to the crowd, it is sort of short-circuiting the audience's brain to get to sort of a more like animalistic response, just because it's just like, what the fuck is happening? You know what I mean?
It matches the sound. It matches the sound perfectly, and that's why, you know, no shade to anybody else, but that's why you see everyone else fucking copying his visuals.
Oh yeah,
basically.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I guess you know, to kind of bring it home a little bit, like, where do you see yourself? You're always working on music. You have a million songs. We know this. Like, do you have a vision for where you want to take it, either in the short term or the long term? And this isn't necessarily like, what do you got coming up? Although it can be if you want it to be that, but just in terms of like where you're at artistically, musically, where you want to take it. Like, what are you thinking about for Fox Stevenson right now going into the future?
So how I feel and what'll end up happening is invariably one of those things that shifts and parts ways and collides, as is the music industry. But musically, I've moved to a new DAW, and I'm ridiculously inspired.
Which one?
Bitwig.
Oh, interesting.
It's ridiculous.
Someone, do you know Jamie Lax, who also does music as Link? He was just talking to me about Bitwig the last time I saw him in LA. I don't know if he fully switched, but he was thinking about trying it out.
Well, that's funny. He hit me up on I hope he doesn't mind me saying this. He hit me up on Instagram to ask me about a folder thing I did in Logic, because he used to be a Logic user.
Right.
And I told him that I'd moved to Bitwig, and I was telling him he should try it out. So,
maybe that's what he then told me. That's hilarious.
Yeah. But Bitwig's just amazing. And if you've been producing for a really long time, especially, it's really because of the granular way in which you can just like create little envelopes, and the way that MIDI works, and it you can do things that I don't think I've been able to do as quickly in any other DAW, because I am reasonably proficient with Ableton. It's just you can draw straighter lines from problem to solution in terms of what's the tools that are there, because of the modularity of it. Right. But because of that, I am really inspired. I'm writing a lot of music and trying to just up the bet, find center of my music more than anything. And I want to write better songs, better produced, and hopefully capture the things that have made the tracks that most people in my listener base agree on are the best ones, and capture that and then extend it and extrapolate it and make it bigger and better, whilst also remaining true to what it is that I want to do. And long term, I want to be that guy. I want to be that guy who does break the levee for this singer, songwriter, producer, dance, post-EDM thing. There's not many of us who are the singer and the producer, and I think it would be a shame if whoever did that wasn't one of those people. And I would like to be that guy. Porter could be that guy. There's plenty of other people I could see doing it. Or we're gonna have some 15-year-old out of Kansas who's just gonna blow the world up in a couple of years. Like, it could be anything like that.
I don't think it necessarily has to be just one person either. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that Porter's already done it to a certain extent in his lane, in his world, but there's so much unexplored territory. Like Porter,
I mean, he's huge, but he's not Skrillex yet. I mean Skrillex, like cultural. Like we are due a musical revolution that is post dance music. Like,
yeah, I think that's true, and I think you're right that we're due. I think you're right that a lot of people in the community feel that way, and so I think there's a lot of excitement of like anytime something new comes out, I think people are checking for it and like trying to figure out what's interesting about it, and I think everyone is sort of keyed into that same frequency. But yeah, I don't know, man. I feel like there's so many ways it could go. It is fun to sort of be like, yeah, who's gonna really break it open like that? Because you're right. Skrillex is a guy who gets referenced on this podcast in these interviews all the time. Like he was the reason an entire generation of people started making dance music. And I think you're right that the next one of those has not come around just yet.
He's a BC AD moment for dance music, Like, and obviously I do want to clarify that was absolutely nothing against Porter, because what he has going on is beautiful and obviously connects incredibly with his listener base and is a thing of beauty for that. I think that someone will do it, and chances are it'll sound nothing like any of us, or exactly like or suddenly all it'll take is for one person's song to go massive on TikTok, and then an entire generation of kids who didn't know that dance music could be not dubstep is going to be in on Madian or in on Louis the Child or something
or you, man. I mean, I feel like
or myself.
Yeah, like that, I think that's what makes it kind of fun and exciting too. I don't know if for you, but like the fact that it could happen at any time. And that, that's not something any of us control. But if you stick around, stick to your guns, stay engaged, keep having fun and exploring, that like it could happen at any time. It could happen tomorrow. It might not, but it could. And I don't know, that's kind of fun.
And that's why you got to make what you love, because if the thing that blows up is something you made by accident, you're fucked.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that's a real bad news situation.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, this has been great, man. I feel like we could keep talking for hours here, but I want to let you go. Is there anything else we haven't talked about? Anything else that's on your mind? Anything I didn't ask you? Anything else you want to get out there before we wrap it up?
It's maybe I'll come join again in 6 months or something.
I would love that, man. Yeah, anytime.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've both had angles from different sides of the Atlantic on the same giant cultural change in something that we both have loved for a very long time, and I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man. And yeah, really, really happy to get your perspective on here. So thank you for doing it.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, man. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take care, man. Be well.
All right, man. You too.
Later.
Peace,
Bye-bye.
buddy.